Hi, welcome back to Focal Point AF or Talk. Brian Fisher is my name. This is the second hour of a Focal Point on the American Family Radio Talk Network. I just want to close the loop on my conversation with Gabe in the last segment. And Gabe, I really appreciate you calling in. And I think, where we came to in our conversation is kind of a very revealing thing, that there is terminology we use that other people may find objectionable. And so we're told, well, don't use those terms. Don't use that word because people object to it. Well, that's fine. If the term is objectionable, then I agree. I don't use the N-word. I've never used the N-word in my life. That word has never crossed my lips. Never use it, never would use it. I don't use the F word. I've never called anybody that word. I've never even used the F word in private conversations because it's an offensive term to me. I don't use it because the term itself is offensive, so I don't use it. So, but allowing other people to define terminology that I use that is either legally correct or anatomically correct, and to give other people the power to tell me that I've got to remove that word from my vocabulary because it's offensive to them when it's a perfectly neutral, objective word. I'm not going to give anybody that kind of power over my vocabulary. Unless you can show me that term is objectively an offensive term, I'm not going to give you the power for you to dictate to me what words I can use to describe what is going on. And I think about Jesus, and imagine what if people were trying to coach Jesus on the terminology to use. In fact, his disciples at one point said, Jesus, they went to him and said, look, don't you know that when you use those words, you're offending these people. You're upsetting them. And, Jesus would, and he didn't care. Jesus didn't care. He said, look, it's the truth, and I'm speaking the truth. And if they find it offensive, well, that's their problem. I mean, that's basically what Jesus said. Look, if I simply use terms, I simply speak the truth, and they find the truth offensive, that is not my problem. The problem is not with me. Now, I'm not gonna set out deliberately to offend somebody. I got no interest in doing that. But if somebody's offended because I use a term that is correct, it is in line with the truth, you can look it up in the dictionary, it's a perfectly fine word. I'm not going to give anybody the power to tell me what words can and cannot be in my vocabulary. And you think about words that Jesus used. Remember when he referred to the scribes and Pharisees as a brood of vipers. And another time, he referred to them as the spawn of Satan. Said, you are sons of your father, the devil. That's a polite way of, well, it's not a polite way, I guess. I mean, it's just a pretty direct way saying you are the spawn of the devil. That's Jesus using that terminology. So again, if we look at Jesus as our model, then Jesus was, he could be pretty blunt. He could be pretty direct. And he would use terminology that other people found quite offensive. And he seemed deliberately chose to do it. When he called them a brood of vipers, that wasn't a slip of the tongue. I mean, he said that quite deliberately when he called them the spawn of Satan. Quite deliberately. And I've never used terminology that strong ever. I've never called anybody the spawn of Satan on this program. So I mean, there's plenty of room between the strongest language I've ever used and the strongest language that Jesus used. There's still some play there. There's some latitude there. There are some tolerance limits there. There are some thresholds that I have not crossed that Jesus has and I have not. So, all right, let's go back to the phones, 888-589-8840. Let's go to Buddy in Victoria, Texas. Buddy, welcome. What's on your mind?
Thank you for taking my call, number one, and I appreciate everything y'all are doing and y'all have done, but the president doesn't. And since I said the president doesn't, he's highly separating America.
Now, tell me again what you think the president does not do. I want to be sure I understand you. Say we have a president that doesn't.
What the president is doing, he doesn't like what y'all do.
Uh-huh.
Okay? What the president's doing is separating the people.
And
evidently, he's never liked the white man. Evidently, he's never appreciated America, because even his wife said something about how they didn't like America.
Yeah, and she was talking about how when he was nominated for the presidency for the first time in her life,
Right.
she was proud of her country, proud to be an American.
I heard her say that.
Yeah, and so and it's interesting to me because when he campaigned in 2008, and I'd appreciate your reaction to this, but when he campaigned in 2008, everybody looked at him as the great uniter. He was going to heal all of our racial divisions. We were going to become a post-racial country under his leadership, and yet that hasn't happened. And kind of what I hear you saying is maybe one of the reasons that we haven't experienced this wonderful kind of post-election racial harmony may be because the president is not a uniter, but is instead a divider.
There you go. There you go. You said exactly what is going on.
Well, and that's interesting to me, and most of the surveys I've seen verify this or bear this out. When you ask people, even in the black community, are things better today racially than they were before President Obama took office? And they will say no. I mean, I've got a story buried in the stack somewhere about the polling data on that. And most people, no matter what racial background they have, whether they're white or Hispanic or black, they will say no. From a racial standpoint, tensions are higher now than when President Obama was elected. Things are worse than when he was brought into office. All right, buddy, listen, I appreciate the call, and I think a lot of people out there agreeing with you that the president is not a uniter, but has instead become a divider. Let's go to Chris in Columbus, Ohio. Chris, welcome. What's on your mind?
I think the tentacles of the Southern Poverty Law Center run way deeper than trying to falsely associate you guys with a false flag outfit like the Westboro Baptist Church.
Mm-hmm.
In the hometown I'm from, the elected officials wanted to do a long-term land use planning strategy session with the involvement of the Agenda 21 office in our county. Okay, and they touted Agenda 21 as harmless and all this, that, and the other thing. Well, there was a lot of comments in the newspaper's online edition about how people were extremely uncomfortable with the idea of Agenda 21 being brought into our county on an official basis. And so what the people behind this did was they invited a speaker from the Southern Poverty Law Center to come to the local university and vouch for how harmless and how great and how wonderful Agenda 21 and long-term land use planning is.
Wow.
And for anybody who knows anything about Agenda 21, which I know this is kind of going off, I'm going to keep it short. It's about as much in rebellion against God as you can get, is that Agenda 21.
Well, and that's coming out of the UN, so it's just part of this globalism movement. It's part of really what amounts to kind of global socialism.
They want us to all live like cavemen and feel guilty if we don't live like cavemen to prevent us from taking up their precious resources. And they also want to make it a crime for us to live like anything other than a caveman.
Yeah. All right. Well, I appreciate the call. Thank you for that, Chris. I appreciate that. And, so there's the SPLC involved in promoting Agenda 21, which is just a socialist, Marxist, globalist agenda coming right out of the UN. And as Chris pointed out, that Agenda 21, very hostile toward population growth, or hostile toward people. They want to return the planet to its pristine state, minus any human beings whom they regard simply as noxious weeds. All right, Focal Point AFR Talk, back in 2 minutes.